900 giant stone heads. Islands that lost half their forests. A civilization that changed itself. What really drove the people of Easter Island to build the Moai? Let's find out. Easter Island, one of the most remote places on Earth, home to nearly 900 colossal stone figures known as the Moai. Silent giants standing guard over the land, staring endlessly toward the horizon. But who carved them? How were they moved sometimes miles across rugged terrain without modern tools or animals? And most importantly, why did an isolated civilization dedicate centuries to building them? For decades, historians and archaeologists have tried to decode this mystery, from wild alien theories to the heartbreaking truth of human ambition and survival. In this video, we're diving deep into the real story behind the Moai, exploring their creation, their meaning, and the myths that still surround them today. So, if you think you already know the secret of Easter Island, think again. Stay with me, because what we uncover next might completely change the way you see these ancient statues. Chapter 1. The Forgotten Island in the Middle of Nowhere. In the middle of the Pacific Ocean, far away from any continent, trade route, or civilization, lies a speck of land that seems almost misplaced by nature itself. A triangle of volcanic rock surrounded by thousands of miles of endless blue. This is Easter Island, known to its native people as Rapa Nui, the navel of the world. It's a place so isolated that even today, flying here feels like stepping off the map. No neighboring countries, no nearby islands, just ocean, horizon, and silence. And yet, this forgotten island once carried one of the most ambitious societies the ancient world has ever seen. Long before European ships appeared on the horizon, long before global maps were drawn, Polynesian explorers set sail across the world's largest ocean, guided only by the stars and their deep understanding of wind, waves, and nature's rhythm. These were some of the greatest navigators in human history, people who could read the sea as easily as we read a book. Sometime between 700 and 1200 AD, after weeks, maybe months, on open waters, they found land. A lonely volcanic island covered in lush palm forests, nesting birds, and rich soil, untouched by humans for millennia. To the first settlers, this was a blank canvas, a paradise carved out of nothing but ocean and courage. They brought with them seeds, chickens, and memories of their ancestors. They built homes from timber and grass. They fished the surrounding waters and farmed the fertile slopes. And in isolation, they began to create a new culture, one born from both survival and imagination. But isolation can be a strange teacher. Cut off from the rest of the world, every problem becomes personal. Every success, sacred. For the Rapa Nui, survival wasn't just about food and shelter. It was about connection. Connection to the land, the sea, and most of all, their ancestors. They believed the spirits of their ancestors, called mana, continued to watch over the living. And as generations passed, they found a way to make that belief tangible, to give it shape, form, and face. That's when they began carving the Moai. At first glance, the Moai seem silent. But when you stand before them, their giant eyes staring over the island, you feel something almost alive. Each one represents a powerful ancestor, a leader, or a protector. Each one was believed to hold spiritual energy, the strength to bless the land, to bring rain, and to guard their people. But the question that puzzles us today, and stunned every explorer who saw them centuries later, is how? How did a small, isolated community with no metal tools, no beasts of burden, and no contact with the outside world create almost 900 stone statues, some weighing more than 80 tons? Think about it. 80 tons. That's heavier than a Boeing 737 aircraft. And somehow, they carved these giants from volcanic rock, moved them across hills and valleys, and raised them upright without cranes, without wheels, without even iron chisels. To early European visitors, it seemed impossible. Some refused to believe that the islanders themselves could have done it. That disbelief would eventually give rise to all kinds of myths, from lost civilizations to ancient aliens. But as archaeology would later prove, the truth didn't come from beyond the stars. It came from human hands, human faith, and an unshakable sense of purpose. What's even more fascinating is that the moai weren't scattered randomly. They were placed strategically across the island, often near villages, facing inward, toward the people, not the sea. They were protectors, not idols. Silent guardians watching over their descendants, ensuring balance between the living and the dead. But this extraordinary achievement came at a cost. Rapa Nui was small, only about 63 square miles. Its forests, once vast, were not infinite. And over centuries of construction, transportation, and expansion, the island's balance began to shift. What started as devotion began turning into competition. Different clans wanted bigger, taller, more magnificent moai, symbols of power and prestige. And as they pushed their limits, they pushed the island's resources closer to collapse. But that's a story for another chapter. Right now, imagine standing on that windswept island. No noise, no machines, just the sound of waves and the whisper of stone. Hundreds of moai rising against the sky, their eyes fixed forever on the horizon. An entire civilization forgotten by time, whispering its story through stone. This is where our journey begins. The mystery of Easter Island isn't just about statues. It's about people, belief, and the fragile line between greatness and destruction. In the next chapter, we meet the people behind the moai, the Rapa Nui themselves. Who were they? What drove them to carve stone into spirit? And what hidden meaning lies behind their silent faces? The answers will surprise you. Chapter 2. The Rapa Nui, builders of stone and spirit. Who were the people who built these giants? Who carved faces from mountains and gave them souls through stone? To understand the moai, we must first understand the Rapa Nui, the extraordinary islanders whose vision turned an isolated rock in the Pacific into one of humanity's greatest achievements. A society born from the sea. The Rapa Nui were Polynesians, descendants of the legendary voyagers who conquered the Pacific long before Europeans even dreamed of crossing oceans. They came from islands like the Marquesas or Mangariva, bringing with them their crops, animals, and knowledge of navigation, astronomy, and community. But when they reached Easter Island, they found something entirely different from the lush, tropical homes they'd known. Here, the winds were harsh, the soil volcanic, and the distance from other lands almost unimaginable. Yet they adapted. They built stone houses shaped like inverted boats, reminders of their seafaring past. They learned to grow sweet potatoes, taro, and bananas in rock-enclosed gardens that captured heat and moisture from the ground. They fished the open seas and raised chickens for food. Cut off from the rest of humanity, the Rapa Nui turned inward. Their creativity and faith focused entirely on the land beneath their feet and the ancestors buried within it. The power of mana, life force from the ancestors at the heart of Rapa. Nui life was a belief in mana, a spiritual energy that flowed through people, places, and especially ancestors. When a chief or respected elder died, his spirit was believed to continue protecting the tribe through his mana. But how do you honor that spirit? How do you give it form? The answer was the moai. Each statue wasn't just a symbol, it was a vessel, a physical body for the spirit of a powerful ancestor. The Rapa Nui believed that as long as the moai stood, their ancestors' mana would flow through the land, blessing crops, calming the seas, and bringing prosperity to their clan. That's why nearly every moai faces inward, not outward, toward the ocean. They don't watch the horizon. They watch over their people. Imagine a village at dawn, smoke rising from thatched homes, waves crashing in the distance, and towering moai standing silently behind them. The people looked up to those faces every morning, not as gods, but as protectors, as family. To the Rapa Nui, the moai were alive. When a statue's eyes were carved and placed, usually made of white coral and red volcanic stone, that was the moment the ancestor S spirit entered it. They called this ritual giving sight, awakening the statue's power. From that point onward, the moai wasn't just a monument. It was presence, watching, blessing, remembering. The rise of the clans and the spirit of competition. As generations passed, the island's population grew, and so did the power of its different clans. Each tribe, led by a chief, wanted their moai to be taller, heavier, and grander than the others. Building moai became not just a spiritual duty, but a symbol of prestige, pride, and influence. Villages competed fiercely to prove their devotion and strength. The larger the moai, the more mana the clan appeared to possess. And so, the race to build bigger and better statues began. It was a golden age of creation. The island echoed with the rhythmic tapping of stone chisels, the chants of workers, and the sacred rituals that accompanied each carving. The quarry of Rano, an ancient volcanic crater, became the beating heart of this civilization, the birthplace of the moai. Some men spent their entire lives in that quarry, carving, polishing, perfecting these massive figures out of volcanic tuff. Others formed teams to transport the finished statues to their final resting platforms, called ahu, near the villages. Every moai was a promise, a connection between the living and the dead, the earth and the divine. Harmony between humanity and nature for centuries. This system worked. The islanders lived in balance with their environment, replanting trees, sharing resources, and maintaining the rhythm of life. It wasn't a story of madness or blind worship. It was one of harmony, belief, and respect for lineage. But beneath that harmony, something was changing. As the Moai grew larger and the clans more ambitious, the island's forests began to thin. The balance between faith and survival started to falter. Still, for a long time, the Rapa Nui held on to their traditions, unaware that their greatest creation, these magnificent statues, would also be the seed of their greatest struggle. The Rapa Nui were not savages, as early explorers once claimed. They were innovators, artists, engineers, and spiritual visionaries. Their world revolved around the idea that the past was never gone, that ancestors lived among them, whispering through the wind and the waves, and they turned that belief into stone. But carving the Moai was only the beginning. The real miracle was yet to come. How did they move these colossal figures across miles of rugged land without wheels, animals, or machines? In the next chapter, we uncover one of the most fascinating mysteries in human history, the secret of how the statues walked. Chapter 3: Birth of the Moai, Carving Giants from Volcanoes. High on the eastern side of Easter Island stands a silent witness to one of humanity's greatest creative undertakings, the Rano Raraku Quarry. To the untrained eye, it looks like just another volcanic hill. But look closer, and you'll see something astonishing. Hundreds of Moai, some fully formed, others half buried, still attached to the mountain itself, frozen in time. This crater wasn't just a quarry, it was a factory of faith, the sacred birthplace of every Moai that would one day stand proudly along the island's coasts. For the Rapa Nui, this was hallowed ground. It was here that stone and spirit met, where the memory of ancestors was literally carved out of the earth. The stone of the gods, the Moai, were carved from volcanic tuff, a soft, compressed volcanic ash that could be shaped using stone tools. It wasn't easy work. Each statue took months, sometimes even years to complete. Hundreds of workers lived and worked near the quarry, crafting statues day and night. Using handheld basalt picks and chisels, they carved out the body first, from head to torso, directly into the side of the crater wall. Then, they carefully chiseled underneath to separate the statue from the mountain, leaving just enough stone beneath to hold it steady until it was ready to be born. It was delicate, dangerous work. One wrong strike could shatter a statue that had taken years to shape. But the Rapa Nui weren't just building stone figures. They believed they were releasing ancestral spirits trapped within the rock. Imagine the scene. Dozens of carvers covered in dust, chanting rhythmic prayers as they chip away at the volcanic wall. The sound of stone echoing through the crater like a heartbeat. Slowly, a face begins to emerge. Long nose, deep eyes, a stoic expression. And as each curve takes form, it's as if an ancestor is awakening from a 1,000-year sleep. To them, carving wasn't a craft, it was communion, the sacred design. Every Moai followed a symbolic pattern: long ears, pronounced brows, and elongated faces, all representing nobility, wisdom, and power. Most Moai stood between 10 and 20 feet tall, but a few reached astonishing sizes. The largest, known as El Gigante, measures over 70 feet in length and weighs an estimated 270 tons. It was never completed, still lying in the volcanic rock, as if waiting for the next generation to finish the dream. Each statue was personalized to honor a specific ancestor. Carvers would sometimes engrave subtle details, a certain chin, a unique shape of the lips, to make it resemble the person it was meant to embody. The head, often disproportionately large, symbolized the spiritual intelligence and mana of the ancestor. And yet, for all their power and beauty, these statues were just the beginning. Once a moai was carved, it had to be moved often miles across rough terrain to its final resting place near the villages. A single mistake during transport could break the statue, ending years of work and shattering a community's spiritual pride. But somehow, they did it. They didn't just drag the moai, they made them walk. The moai's journey begins when a moai was ready. Workers would cut away the final layer of stone that connected it to the crater. The statue was then lowered gently using ropes and wooden supports, a process that required incredible coordination and strength. Then came the next challenge, moving it across miles of hills and volcanic soil. Some moai weighed more than 80 tons, the size of a small locomotive, and had to be transported without wheels, metal, or animals. For centuries, historians were baffled. How could a civilization with such limited technology move hundreds of massive statues? Many assumed they must have used tree logs to roll them. Others believed they built complex sledges and ramps. But the most fascinating theory of all, the one proven by modern experiments, suggests that the moai were walked. That's right. Using ropes and balance, teams on either side would rock the statue gently from side to side, inching it forward like a walking figure. It took rhythm, timing, and teamwork, and astonishingly, it worked. In 2012, archaeologists Terry Hunt and Carl Lippo recreated the technique with a full-size replica. With just 18 people and a few ropes, they made the statue walk down a path, exactly as local oral traditions had described. The legend was true. The moai did walk. The spiritual march of the moai for the Rapa Nui. This wasn't just transport, it was ceremony. As the moai walked, the people sang chants to guide its movement. They believed the statue itself was alive, its ancestor spirit helping it move toward its final home. When it finally reached its platform, or ahu, the community held rituals of celebration and thanksgiving. The statue would be erected upright, using ropes, levers, and immense coordination, an engineering marvel for its time. Then came the most sacred moment of all, the placing of the eyes. Using white coral and red scoria stone, artisans carved and inserted eyes into the moai sockets. At that instant, the statue was activated. It could now see. It could now protect. The ancestor had officially returned, not as flesh, but as stone. Every one of these statues represents generations of knowledge, labor, and faith. From the quarry to the cliffs, from dust to divinity, the moai tell a story of unity between human hands and spiritual heart. But as the moai grew taller and grander, something beneath the surface of Rapa Nui society began to shift. The harmony between nature and humanity, once so sacred, was beginning to unravel. In the next chapter, we uncover how these giants walked across the island, and how the very act of moving them may have pushed an entire civilization to the edge of collapse. Chapter 4. walking statues, the great transportation mystery for centuries. The Moai of Easter Island have stood like silent giants, scattered across the island, some near the coast, others deep inland, and many lying unfinished in the volcanic quarry of Rapa. But there's one question that has puzzled everyone who has ever seen them. How on earth did the ancient Rapa Nui people move these massive statues, some weighing more than 80 tons, without modern tools, machines, or even wheels? It's one of archaeology's greatest mysteries. The very idea seems impossible. The islanders didn't have horses, oxen, or carts. The terrain is rough and hilly. And yet, somehow, hundreds of these giant figures were moved miles across the island and carefully positioned on stone platforms called ahu, each perfectly balanced, facing inward toward the villages. So how did they do it? Let's travel back nearly 1,000 years to when the first moai were being carved. The Rapa Nui people believed these statues held the mana, or spiritual power, of their ancestors, that the moai protected their people and their land. So moving them wasn't just a task, it was a sacred ritual, something that had to be done with honor and precision. For generations, explorers offered wild theories. Some said the islanders rolled the moai on logs, like giant tree trunks. Others thought they dragged them on wooden sleds using ropes. But the problem was, there weren't enough trees on Easter Island to make that possible. By the time the moai were being transported in large numbers, the island's forest was already disappearing. So what if they didn't roll them at all? What if they walked them? That's exactly what the Rapa Nui people have been saying all along. Their oral legends tell of a time when the statues walked across the island, moved by the power of their ancestors. Early Western explorers laughed at this idea, assuming it was just myth. But in recent decades, science has started to reveal something incredible. The myth may have been telling the truth all along. In 2012, a team of archaeologists led by Terry Hunt and Carl Lippo decided to test this ancient claim. They built a replica of a moai, nearly 10 feet tall and weighing over 5 tons. Then, using only ropes and manpower, they began to walk it just as the Rapa Nui described. And unbelievably, it worked. With 3 teams pulling in rhythm from different sides, the statue began to rock gently from side to side, inching forward step by step, just like a person walking. It didn't require wheels, logs, or huge ramps. Only careful coordination and the genius of physics. Each tug, each sway, brought the moai closer to its destination, proving that what seemed impossible for centuries was actually ingenious engineering. The Rapa Nui didn't have cranes or trucks, but they had something just as powerful: knowledge, unity, and belief. They turned stone into something alive. And if you look closely at the moai still standing upright on the island today, you'll notice something fascinating. Their design actually supports this theory. Their broad bellies, tilted forward stance, and angled bases make them naturally stable while rocking. It's as if the statues were built to walk from the very beginning. So maybe the Rapa Nui weren't exaggerating when they said their ancestors helped move the moai. Maybe they were describing an ingenious technique, passed down through generations, that looked so magical it became myth. Because in their world, the line between the physical and the spiritual wasn't clear. The ancestor spirits were alive in the stone. When they said the Moai walked, they truly believed the statues moved with the power of the past, guided by the unseen hands of those who came before. And that belief gave them strength to move mountains, or in this case, move giants of stone. If the Rapa Nui could make 80-ton statues walk across miles of rugged land, then what else were they capable of? In the next chapter, we explore the purpose behind these statues, what they represented, and why their silent gaze has haunted human imagination for centuries. Chapter 5. Eyes of the Ancestors, the meaning behind the Moai. The morning sun breaks over the endless Pacific horizon. A soft mist rolls across the rugged cliffs of Easter Island, or Rapa Nui, as the locals call it. The shadows of enormous stone figures stretch across the ground, their silent faces bathed in golden light. They stand there, still and eternal, as they have for centuries. But if you look closer, you'll notice something haunting. Each of these faces seems alive, watching, remembering, waiting. For outsiders, the Moai are just mysterious statues. But for the people who carved them, they were far more than stone. They were family. To the Rapa Nui, the Moai were not gods to be worshipped. They were ancestors reborn in stone. Each statue represented a real person, a chief, a warrior, a wise elder, someone who had once walked among them, guided them, and protected them. After death, that leader's spirit was believed to possess a supernatural force called mana, a sacred energy that could bless the land, heal the sick, and ensure good harvests. And so, through the Moai, that mana lived on. Each carving was an act of remembrance, a way to give physical form to the invisible power of ancestry. When a new Moai was completed, it wasn't just a monument, it was a rebirth. The people sang, danced, and chanted prayers as they awakened the statue. Coral eyes with red stone pupils were placed carefully into its sockets, and in that moment the Moai opened its eyes and began to watch over its descendants. It's said that when those eyes were first placed, the island would fall silent as if the ancestors themselves had returned. But here's something fascinating. All the Moai face inward, never out to sea. Why? Because their purpose wasn't to protect the island from outside threats. It was to guard the people living within. Their gaze fell on the villages, the crops, the children, everything the Rapa Nui held sacred. In a way, the island itself became a living temple. Wherever you stood, you were under the eyes of your ancestors, constantly reminded to honor them through your actions, your work, your life. This connection to ancestry was both beautiful and powerful, but it also sparked competition. You see, Rapa Nui wasn't one single kingdom. It was made up of many clans. Each clan wanted to honor its own chief, each one striving to build a bigger, taller, more magnificent Moai than the last. The larger the statue, the more mana it was believed to hold, and the more prestige it brought to the clan that built it. Soon, this rivalry turned the island into an open-air gallery of giants. Nearly 900 Moai were carved across the island, some reaching over 30 feet tall and weighing more than 80 tons. Each was placed on a ceremonial platform called an ahu, perfectly aligned with the stars, the ocean, or the ancestral lands they protected. The Moai stood shoulder to shoulder, their stone faces capturing the pride, spirit, and ambition of an entire civilization. But this relentless pursuit of greatness came at a price. To carve, move, and erect each statue required enormous resources. Ropes made from trees, wooden rollers, tools, and manpower. The forests of Rapa Nui began to thin. Soil eroded. Crops became harder to grow. Yet the competition didn't stop. The Moai had become more than monuments. They were status, power, and faith combined. And so, the people kept building larger, heavier, more elaborate. Their belief was so strong that they risked their own survival for it. Some historians see this as tragic. Others see it as inspiring. Because even in the face of scarcity, the Rapa Nui refused to let their traditions die. They believed that as long as the Moai stood, their ancestors would never abandon them. Each statue was carved with devotion, every curve, every line, a tribute to someone's memory. And in that way, even today, the Moai remained alive. When you stand before them, you can almost feel the energy, the echo of the chants, the rhythm of drums. The heartbeat of a lost world that believed life and death were never truly separate. But time has its own story to tell. Because one day the carving stopped, the songs went silent. The Moai were left unfinished in the quarries, half buried, frozen mid-creation. What happened to the people who gave life to these giants? Did their faith fade? Or did the island itself turn against them? As we move forward, the story of the Moai takes a darker turn, one that reveals not only the collapse of a civilization, but also a chilling reflection of our own world today. In the next chapter, we uncover the fall of the giants, how a thriving culture built on faith and unity spiraled into famine, war, and devastation. What destroyed the Rapa Nui nature, human greed, or something even more mysterious? Chapter 6. The Fall of the Giants, Collapse of a Civilization for hundreds of years. The people of Rapa Nui lived in harmony with their land. They built villages, cultivated crops, and honored their ancestors by raising the mighty Moai that still stand today. From afar, Easter Island seemed like paradise, lush palm forests, fertile soil, and an endless ocean that provided both fish and peace. But paradise rarely lasts forever. The same belief system that made the Rapa Nui great would eventually lead to their downfall. The price of greatness, every Moai was a masterpiece, carved from volcanic tuff in the quarry of Rano and hauled across miles of rugged terrain to its resting place on an ahu. But behind this breathtaking achievement was a quiet cost: the island's natural resources. To move these colossal statues, the Rapa Nui needed wood for ropes, sleds, and food fires to sustain the hundreds of workers who labored for weeks or months at a time. And on a small, isolated island, trees weren't just materials. They were life itself. The palm forests of Easter Island, once towering and thick, began to disappear. With every Moai raised, another section of forest fell. Soon there were no more large trees to make canoes, meaning deep-sea fishing became impossible. The soil, no longer held in place by roots, began to erode. Crops withered, birds vanished. The once green island slowly turned brown and still. The people kept building, because stopping meant more than halting construction. It meant questioning their faith, their ancestors, and everything their world stood upon. The Moai were not just statues. They were promises, symbols that their ancestors still watched and protected them. So they built, until they couldn't anymore. The breaking point as resources vanished, life grew harder. Food became scarce. Clans that once traded peacefully began to turn on each other. Rivalries that had once been spiritual now became physical. The Rapa Nui began fighting for survival and for pride. Archaeological evidence shows that around the 1600s, the island fell into civil war. The once united builders of the Moai turned against one another. Competing clans toppled each other's statues, smashing the faces of their rivals' ancestors, not out of disrespect, but out of desperation. Because if the statues lost their power, maybe new ones could take their place. This was not just the collapse of a society. It was a collapse of belief. Imagine standing on that island as a Rapa Nui villager, surrounded by fallen statues, starving children, and the silence of ancestors who no longer seemed to answer. The songs had stopped. The quarries were empty. The gods or the memories had gone silent. The island turns on its people as famine and conflict deepened. The once proud Rapa Nui people adapted in dark, desperate ways. They turned to smaller tools, simpler shelters, and finally, to survival at any cost. Legends speak of the Huri Moai period, the time when statues were overthrown and chaos ruled. Villages were raided, crops stolen, and some historians even believe that cannibalism emerged in extreme famine. Whether myth or truth, one thing is certain: the spirit that once united the island had fractured. And yet, even amid devastation, some small groups held on to their faith. They performed quiet rituals at night, whispering prayers to their ancestors. They still believed that one day the Moai would rise again, but that day never came. When the outsiders arrived by the time European explorers reached Easter Island in 1722, they found a barren landscape and a few thousand weary survivors. To them, the idea that these people had built such colossal monuments seemed absurd. They assumed an older, greater civilization must have existed before, one that had mysteriously vanished. But the truth was even more tragic. The same people who greeted the Europeans barefoot, underfed, and surrounded by ruins were the descendants of those brilliant engineers, artists and dreamers who had once carved the Moai. They hadn't vanished. They had simply been broken by their own ambition. And the arrival of the Europeans only made things worse. New diseases, slave raids, and foreign exploitation followed. Missionaries banned native rituals, replacing them with Christianity. The Rapa Nui's traditions, their chants, their gods, their ancestral memories were slowly erased. By the 19th century, the one sacred Moai lay scattered across the island, toppled and forgotten. The message in the ruins for nearly 200 years. The Moai lay silent, half-buried, eroded by rain and time. But in their silence, they spoke louder than ever. Because when modern archaeologists began to uncover their secrets, they realized something profound. Easter Island wasn't just a story about failure. It was a story about warning and resilience. The Rapa Nui had built one of the most remarkable societies in human history on one of the most isolated pieces of land on Earth. They mastered art, engineering, and community with almost nothing. Their downfall wasn't caused by ignorance or weakness. It was caused by overconfidence and imbalance. They took too much from the land that gave them everything, believing it would never run out. And when it did, their world collapsed. Sound familiar? Today, scientists see Easter Island as a microcosm of our planet, a smaller version of Earth's own struggle. Limited resources, growing populations, blind ambition. The Moai stand as a reminder that no civilization, no matter how advanced or spiritual, can survive if it turns against the very environment that sustains it. The spirit lives on, and yet, even in ruin, the story of Rapa Nui is not one of defeat, but of endurance. In the 20th century, restoration projects began. Many of the Moai were carefully re-erected, cleaned, and preserved. The descendants of the original Rapa Nui now protect their heritage with pride. They tell their stories again, not as myths, but as history. Because the Moai still stand, watching the island and the ocean just as they always have. Their eyes may be empty, but their message remains. Respect the land. Honor your past. And remember that greatness means nothing without balance. Even today, when you stand among them at sunset, you can almost feel it. A whisper in the wind, a heartbeat in the stone. The ancestors are still there, watching. In the next chapter, we step into the modern era, where science, legend, and archaeology collide. Because the mysteries of Easter Island are far from over. What if the Moai still hold secrets buried beneath the earth? Secrets that could change everything we know about humanity's ancient past. Chapter 7. Unearthing Secrets, Modern Discoveries Beneath the Moai for Centuries. The world saw the Moai as nothing more than giant stone heads scattered across a lonely island staring silently toward the sky. But what if the truth was hidden beneath the ground? When early explorers first arrived on Easter Island, they found hundreds of massive heads sticking out of the soil. Some stood proudly above the surface, others half buried up to their chins. No one questioned it. They simply assumed that's all there was, heads carved in memory of forgotten gods. But they were wrong. In the 20th and 21st centuries, archaeologists began excavating some of these statues. And what they uncovered changed everything we thought we knew about the Moai, the hidden bodies beneath the earth. As researchers began digging, they made a shocking discovery. Beneath each stone head lay a massive body, often more than twice as tall as what was visible above ground. These weren't just heads. They were full-bodied statues, carved with intricate details, long torsos, arms folded over the stomach, delicate carvings, and symbols etched across their backs. Some of these carvings depicted ancient Rapa Nui glyphs, called rongo-rongo, a mysterious script that has never been fully decoded. These inscriptions are among the rarest forms of writing ever found in Polynesia, and they might hold the key to understanding how the islanders saw life, death, and the universe itself. But perhaps even more astonishing was what archaeologists found around the buried bodies: layers of sediment, volcanic ash, and ancient tools, suggesting that many of the statues had slowly been buried by natural erosion over centuries. It wasn't intentional. 'Twas time itself, swallowing their history. So, for hundreds of years, the world stared at their faces, unaware that below the surface lay entire bodies silently hidden, patiently waiting to be rediscovered. The meaning of what lies beneath the discovery of the Moai bodies revealed more than just artistic detail. It revealed purpose. The deep carvings found on the backs of some statues include depictions of canoes, waves, and sacred geometric patterns, possibly representing the connection between the ancestors and the sea, a symbol of life and rebirth. Some archaeologists believe these carvings were not decoration, but part of rituals performed when the statues were first raised. The Moai, in this view, were not just monuments, they were spiritual vessels, holding ancestral power within their stone forms. When the Rapa Nui buried their dead, they often did so near the Ahu platforms, where the Moai stood, as if laying their loved ones under the watchful eyes of their ancestors. The land itself became sacred, a bridge between the living and the dead. So when we look at these statues today, we're not just looking at stone. We're looking at the bones of a civilization still rooted in the earth, still whispering their story through symbols carved 1,000 years ago. Science meets mystery. Modern science has also revealed something equally extraordinary. When archaeologists analyzed the soil around the Moai, they found evidence that the Rapa Nui people had enriched it with natural fertilizers, suggesting that the areas around the statues were once gardens. That's right, the Moai weren't built in isolation. They stood in the middle of ancient agricultural zones. The Rapa Nui might have placed their statues near fertile land to bless the crops, blending spiritual faith with practical survival. This changes how we see the Moai completely. They weren't silent idols watching over nothing. They were guardians of life, protectors of the fields that fed their people. And it adds a deeper question. Were the Moai symbols of faith or sophisticated markers of environmental and agricultural control? Even today, archaeologists continue to debate this. But one thing is certain. Every time scientists peel back a layer of soil, they find more proof that the Rapa Nui civilization was far more advanced, intentional, and intelligent than once believed. Unanswered questions still, mysteries remain. Why did the Rapa Nui carve so many statues, nearly 900, yet leave so many unfinished in the quarry? Why were some Moai placed facing the sea, breaking tradition? And what secrets do those undeciphered glyphs on their backs truly hold? Each discovery seems to answer one question, but open to more. It's as if the island itself guards its past, allowing only fragments to surface 1 century at a time. And maybe that is what makes Easter Island so magnetic. It is not just a story about stone. It's a story about the enduring human need to create meaning in the face of isolation, faith, and time. Echoes of the ancestors. Today, when archaeologists dig into the volcanic soil of Rapa Nui, they often describe a strange feeling, as if the earth itself is alive. Every uncovered statue is like uncovering a heartbeat, a voice from the past, rising once more after centuries of silence. As each Moai's body is revealed, so too is another layer of history, a new understanding of the people who built them, and of the wisdom they left behind. The Rapa Nui may have vanished from history's spotlight, but their message hasn't. It's written not on paper, but in stone and soil. Because beneath the ground, the Moai still stand buried, waiting, patient, as if reminding us that truth always finds its way to the surface. In the next chapter, we'll dive into the scientific breakthroughs that are helping decode Rapa Nui, its most mysterious language, the Rongo-Rongo script, and explore whether it could hold clues not just about Easter Island's past, but about humanity's ancient connection to the stars. Chapter 8: The Forgotten Language of the Moai for Centuries. The statues of Easter Island have stared silently toward the horizon. But what if they once had a voice? Not a voice carved in stone, but a written language, a lost script that might hold the key to understanding who built the Moai, how they lived, and what they believed. This is the story of Rongo-Rongo, one of the world's greatest unsolved linguistic mysteries. A discovery that shocked the world in 1864. A Catholic missionary named Eugene Arrow arrived on Easter Island. As he walked through abandoned villages, he noticed something strange: wooden tablets, covered with intricate carvings of tiny, stylized figures and symbols. Some looked like humans, others like birds, fish, or geometric shapes. Each line was carved in a continuous, flowing style, and when Arrow asked the islanders what they meant, they told him something incredible. These carvings, they said, were not just art. They were writing the ancient language of their ancestors. Arrow had stumbled upon what may have been the only known indigenous writing system of the Pacific Ocean, the Rongo-Rongo script, but tragically, it was already dying. By the time European missionaries arrived, the Rapa Nui culture had been devastated by disease, enslavement, and colonial disruption. The few islanders who could still read or write Rongo-Rongo were gone. Their knowledge passed through generations, vanished with them. Today, only about 24 Rongo-Rongo tablets survive, scattered across museums and private collections worldwide. And not a single one has been fully decoded. The enigma of the glyphs: each Rongo-Rongo symbol, or glyph, is carved in a unique style, part pictograph, part abstract symbol. There are over 600 unique glyphs representing humans, animals, plants, celestial objects, and mysterious geometric shapes. But what makes Rongo-Rongo even more fascinating is how it was written. The script follows a rare pattern known as reverse booster feeding, meaning one line is written left to right, and the next line right to left with the characters flipped upside down. It's a complex, almost hypnotic writing system, suggesting that whoever invented it had remarkable intellectual sophistication. And yet, no one knows what the symbols mean. Some researchers believe Rongo-Rongo represents a syllabic script similar to early Polynesian languages. Others think it's mnemonic, a symbolic system meant to help priests remember sacred chants and oral histories. But one theory stands above the rest: the celestial theory, a map of the stars. In recent decades, some archaeologists and linguists have noticed an intriguing pattern. Certain Rongo-Rongo glyphs resemble astronomical symbols: the sun, the moon, and constellations. Could it be that Rongo-Rongo was more than just a writing system? Could it have been a calendar, or even a cosmic record used by Rapa Nui priests to track celestial events? Evidence suggests the Rapa Nui people were deeply connected to the stars. The Moai statues, for example, are aligned in specific directions that may correspond to stellar positions or solstices. If this theory is true, Rongorongo could represent a cosmic code, an attempt by an isolated civilization to align their faith, agriculture, and ancestors with the movements of the heavens, a culture at the edge of the world, trying to speak the language of the universe. Attempts to crack the code over the last century, cryptographers, linguists, and even AI models have tried to decode the mysterious script. In the 1950s, Russian researcher Irina Fedorova proposed that Rongorongo recorded genealogies and myths, ancient family trees carved into wood. Later, researchers suggested that certain repeated glyphs might represent rituals, gods, or chants repeated during ceremonies honoring the ancestors. In the 1990s, advanced computer models began analyzing the frequency and pattern of the symbols. Some sequences showed statistical repetition, the hallmark of true linguistic structure, not random decoration. That means Rongorongo wasn't just art, it was language. But because there is no bilingual text, no Rosetta Stone, its full meaning remains out of reach. Each tablet, like the Moai themselves, remains silent, whispering only hints of what once was, a civilization that spoke in symbols. The existence of Rongorongo changes how we see the Rapa Nui people. They were not primitive islanders, as once believed. They were scholars, astronomers, and spiritual thinkers who developed an entire system of communication in total isolation. Think about that. An island thousands of miles from any other major civilization, inventing its own writing system independently. It's one of the rarest events in human history. Only a handful of times in Mesopotamia, Egypt, China, and Mesoamerica has a society independently developed writing. Rapa Nui might be the fifth. That alone makes Rongorongo one of humanity's most important unsolved puzzles. The vanishing of the knowledge keepers, but why was this knowledge lost? The answer is painful. When Peruvian slave raiders invaded Easter Island in the 1860s, they captured hundreds of Rapa Nui people, including priests and elders who were likely the last who could read the script. Most never returned. Then came disease, colonization, and conversion by missionaries who considered the old ways pagan. Many of the remaining tablets were destroyed, burned as firewood, or taken overseas. By the time modern researchers arrived, the language had fallen silent forever. The people who once carved their thoughts into wood, the scribes of the Pacific, were gone. The last echo of a lost voice today. The surviving Rongorongo tablets are treated like sacred relics. Scientists scan them with 3D technology, trace their engravings with lasers, and feed the data into artificial intelligence models, hoping to find patterns no human eye can see. And yet, the mystery endures. Maybe we'll never fully decode Rongorongo. Maybe it was never meant to be read in a traditional sense. Maybe it was a spiritual bridge, a way to connect the physical and the divine, the living and the dead. A language of the soul. And when we look at those carved wooden lines, we not just looking at symbols, we looking at an entire civilization's lost voice, trapped in silence for centuries. If the Rapa Nui created such a complex writing system, far from any known influence, then what else did they know? In the next chapter, we'll explore one of the most mind-bending theories of all. Could Easter Island have been a center of ancient global contact? A forgotten node in humanity's prehistoric network that connected civilizations across the oceans. Chapter 9. Ancient Global Connections. Was Easter Island linked to other civilizations? When you look at Easter Island on a map, it seems like the loneliest place on Earth. A small triangle of land, just 14 miles wide, floating in the middle of the vast Pacific Ocean, more than 2,000 miles from the nearest continent. It's easy to imagine the Rapa Nui people as completely isolated, cut off from the rest of humanity. But what if they weren't? What if Easter Island wasn't just a remote outpost, but a crossroads of ancient global contact, a forgotten link in humanity's hidden network of oceanic travelers, a civilization too advanced to be alone? Let's start with a simple question. How did a small island civilization with limited tools, no metal, and no beasts of burden create nearly 900 statues, each weighing up to 80 tons? The precision, the engineering, the astronomical alignment, all of it suggests a level of sophistication far beyond what was expected of such an isolated people. Some archaeologists have suggested that the Rapa Nui inherited knowledge from earlier Polynesian navigators, whose seafaring skills were unmatched. These were people who navigated across thousands of miles of open ocean using nothing but stars, winds, and waves long before Europeans even knew the Pacific existed. But others believe there may be more to the story, because across the world, in South America, in Egypt, in ancient Asia, we find similar megalithic structures, similar mythologies, and even similar iconography. Could these resemblances be mere coincidence, or echoes of a deeper, forgotten connection? Clues across the Pacific. When the first explorers reached Easter Island in the 18th century, they were shocked. The Rapa Nui, Polynesian by language and genetics, looked different from what they expected. Some had lighter complexions, some taller statures, features that hinted at mixed ancestry. Later, genetic studies revealed something astonishing. Traces of native South American DNA in ancient Rapa Nui remains. That means, at some point, centuries before Columbus, before Magellan, there was contact between Polynesians and the Americas. In other words, people from two sides of the world, separated by thousands of miles of ocean, somehow met. But how? Ancient Polynesian voyagers were master navigators, capable of crossing immense distances in double-hulled canoes. And the South Americans, especially the early coastal cultures of Peru and Ecuador, were no strangers to ocean travel either. One theory suggests Polynesians reached South America first, bringing back crops like the sweet potato, which became a staple across the Pacific. Another theory flips the story that South American sailors made their way westward, introducing ideas, symbols, and even genetic material to Easter Island. Either way, it means one thing: Easter Island wasn't alone. Shared symbols and stone secrets now. Here's where things get even stranger. Across different ancient civilizations, thousands of miles apart, we find similar stonework, symbols, and myths. In Peru, the Tiahuanaco ruins feature massive, precise stone carvings that seem to fit together without mortar, much like the basalt platforms of Easter Island where the Moai stand. In both regions, the builders used interlocking stones with joints so tight you can't slide a blade of grass between them, Coincidence? Maybe. But it's the symbolism that raises eyebrows. Both cultures revered the sun. Both built monuments to honor their ancestors. Both used similar shapes in their sacred art: spirals, concentric circles, and winged figures. Even the idea of walking statues appears in legends across the world, from Easter Island Moai to the Egyptian Ka statues, and even the Olmec colossal heads of Mesoamerica. Could this be a universal human impulse? Or does it point to a shared origin, a story that predates recorded history? The ocean as a highway, not a barrier. For centuries, historians treated oceans as barriers. But modern archaeology is rewriting that view. Recent evidence suggests ancient people were far more mobile than we thought. They could cross oceans long before the age of empires. The Pacific, in particular, was not an empty expanse. It was a living network of migration, trade, and exchange. The Polynesians sailed thousands of miles, guided by stars, currents, and intuition. The South Americans built red boats capable of long voyages. And right in the middle of it all, geographically and symbolically, stood Easter Island, a possible meeting point. A crossroads between East and West. Perhaps that's why the island's mythology feels so layered, Polynesian in tone, yet carrying echoes of something older, something broader. Maybe the Moai were not just faces of ancestors, but symbols of unity, guardians of an ancient seafaring legacy that connected worlds before the modern map was ever drawn. Modern evidence, science, joins the story. In recent years, scientists have begun to confirm what oral traditions long suggested. Genetic studies have identified traces of Native American DNA in pre-European Rapa Nui bones. Archaeobotanical research found South American crops, like sweet potatoes on the island, dated centuries before European contact. Canoe-building experiments proved that Polynesian vessels were fully capable of reaching South America and returning safely. Each new discovery pushes the timeline of human connectivity further back and blurs the line between myth and reality. It seems that the story of Easter Island may not be one of isolation, but of interaction. A global legacy hidden in stone when we look at the Moai today, standing silently against the Pacific wind. We're not just looking at the faces of Rapa Nui ancestors. We're re-looking at symbols of human unity, proof that even in the most remote corners of the world, people dreamed, built, and reached beyond their horizons. The mystery of Easter Island might not just be about how they moved the stones, but how they moved across the seas. Their legacy reminds us of something profound, that curiosity, exploration, and connection are not modern inventions. They are the oldest instincts of humanity. Long before global maps or digital networks, we were already a connected species. And Easter Island might just be the stone witness to that forgotten age of contact. But as we uncover signs of contact and connection, a darker question emerges. What ended it all? How did this brilliant civilization, master navigators, engineers, and artists, vanish so completely that only their statues remain? Chapter 10. The Legacy of the Moai. Lessons from a Lost Civilization. As the winds sweep across the lonely plains of Rapa Nui, the Moai still stands silent, solemn, eternal. Their stone faces bear no emotion, yet they seem to speak, not through words, but through presence. They are the last witnesses of a once great civilization, a people who conquered isolation, mastered stone, and carved their ancestors into immortality. But their story is not just about what they built, it's about what they lost. A civilization at its peak centuries ago, Rapa Nui was thriving. Clans competed in art, agriculture, and architecture. Forests covered the island, and fishing canoes filled the sea. The people worshipped their ancestors, chanted their songs, and passed down the secrets of navigation and stonecraft through generations. But with greatness came ambition. Each clan wanted their moai to be taller, heavier, and more majestic than the last. The islanders cut down more trees to roll the stones, to build platforms, to feed workers. Slowly, their paradise began to fade, collapse. The price of greatness at first, it was invisible, just a few trees missing here and there. But over generations, deforestation reached a point of no return. Without trees, the soil eroded. Without soil, crops failed. Without food, society fractured. The moai, once symbols of unity, became reminders of division. Clans began to fight, first over resources, then over power. The statues were toppled in rage, their sacred platforms desecrated. What had once been a spiritual island became a battlefield of survival. And in that moment, the Rapa Nui civilization, the architects of giants, fell silent. It wasn't an invasion, it wasn't a natural disaster. It was a slow unraveling, caused not by ignorance, but by human nature itself. The arrival of the outside world, by the time European explorers arrived in the 1700s, Rapa Nui was a shadow of its former self. The once proud people were struggling to survive. Their forests gone, their culture fragmented. The explorers saw only the ruins, the toppled moai, the empty villages, and assumed the islanders were primitive. They couldn't imagine that the very people standing before them were descendants of master engineers who had once moved mountains. Then came disease, slavery, and colonization, waves of outside forces that nearly erased the Rapa Nui entirely. By the late 19th century, their population had dropped to barely 100. The last of the elders who remembered the old chants, the old scripts, the old ways, passed into silence. And yet, somehow, their legacy endured. The moai never fell for centuries. The moai were buried, broken or forgotten, but never lost. When archaeologists returned in the 20th century, they began restoring the statues, uncovering not just their faces, but their full bodies, revealing that each moai stood on average 20 to 30 feet tall, often with entire torsos buried beneath the soil. It was as if the earth itself had tried to preserve them, hiding for us to rediscover them. And when we did, we realized something powerful. The moai are not just remnants of a vanished culture. They are warnings carved in stone. What the moai teach us today, Easter Island, is more than a historical mystery. It's a mirror of the modern world. A small, isolated ecosystem, once rich, then overused. A society driven by pride and competition. A people who built too much, too fast, without realizing the cost. Doesn't that sound familiar? In many ways, the story of Easter Island is the story of our planet. a reminder that no matter how advanced we become, no civilization is immune to the consequences of its own ambition. But there's another side to this story, one of resilience and rebirth. Despite everything, the Rapa Nui people are still here. Their language lives on. Their traditions endure. Their descendants still honor the Moai, still sing the old songs under the same stars there. Ancestors once navigated by. Easter Island's spirit never died. It adapted. The eternal message of the Moai today, when visitors walk among the statues, they often describe an eerie calm, a sense of being watched, not in fear, but in reverence. Because the Moai remind us of something humanity too often forgets. That greatness is not in what we build, but in what we preserve. Every carved face is a lesson. Every silent stare is a warning. Every shadow cast by a Moai at sunset whispers the same message. Remember who you are, and remember what you've lost. A civilization that never truly vanished in the end. Easter Island's greatest mystery isn't how the Moai were built. It's how the Rapa Nui spirit survived. They may have lost their forests, their resources, their ancient writing, but they never lost their identity. The Moai still stand because the Rapa Nui refused to let them fall. They rebuilt, they remembered, and they passed on the story, not as tragedy, but as legacy. And maybe that's the true meaning of the Moai. Not symbols of power, not relics of pride, but monuments of memory. A promise carved in stone that even in isolation, humanity can create something eternal. As the Pacific winds blow across Rapa Nui and the stars rise over the endless horizon, the Moai still gaze inward, watching over the descendants of those who carved them. They remind us that the line between creation and destruction is thin, and that every civilization, no matter how mighty, must learn from its past to survive its future. So the next time you look at these silent stone faces, remember, they are not just the past. They are a message to all of us. This is not just the mystery of Easter Island. It is the story of us all. If this journey through Easter Island's mysteries moved you, don't let it end here. Hit subscribe to join our growing community at Decoding History and Science. Drop a comment with your thoughts. What do you think the Moai truly represent? And don't forget to leave a like. It helps us uncover more forgotten stories of the past. Because every mystery we solve brings us one step closer to understanding who we really are.